Oh yeah, there we are. We're live.
Wow.
Nice.
I'm going to
Well
turn
done.
down the volume here.
Well, it's 7:01 now and now we're live on YouTube, so we might as well get started. So, whoop, I can hear feedback still, Jen. Thanks. Good evening, everyone. My name is Katie Malinowski, and I'm the Executive Director at the Tug Hill Commission in Watertown, New York. Welcome tonight to tonight's webinar on farmland conservation. The Commission and Tug Hill Tomorrowland Trust are excited to be presenting the second webinar of a three-part series. We will share information about the final installment at the end of tonight's presentation. Our speakers tonight are Erica Goodman, Jeff Kehoe, and Linda Garrett. I'm going to read brief bios for each of them, and then we'll get started. So Erica Goodman is the New York Regional Director at American Farmland Trust, where she oversees the organization's work in New York and neighboring New Jersey. A native New Yorker, she grew up as part of a multi-generational dairy farm family in Washington County. Erica has previously held roles on AFT's National Communications team, served as Associate Director of Corporate Partnership at Food Corps, and since 2016, she has served as Representative at Large for urban, suburban, and rural non-farm interests on the New York State Soil and Water Conservation Committee. She was named one of Hunter College's 40 under 40 in New York City food policy in 2018. Next, we have Jeff Kehoe. Jeff is a farmland protection planner in the Agricultural Protection Unit at the Department of Agriculture and Markets. Here, he works with towns and counties to develop strategies to protect and promote agriculture by making local laws more family-friendly. And Jeff also has advanced degrees in both land use planning and forest management, which complement his roles managing the Ag Planning Grants, Land Trust Grants, as well as the Agricultural Districts Program. Linda has been the executive director of Tug Hill Tomorrowland Trust since 2002. She works with staff, private landowners, and partners to protect working lands in and around Tug Hill and Fort Drum, and provides outdoor and educational programs for kids and the general public throughout the region. To date, the Land Trust has protected over 20,000 acres and raised over $10 million for land protection. So a couple of housekeeping items. Please use the chat function at the bottom of your screen to ask questions. Everyone is muted, but please feel free to type anything in there. We will try to answer them throughout the presentation. We also have a few interactive polls for you to answer as we go, so watch for those to pop up on your screen as well. And if you stay to the end, Linda will be giving away 2 Tug Hill Natural History Field Guides. We hope you will find this presentation informative. Again, thank you for being here tonight. So with that, I will turn it over to Erica.
Great, thank you, Katie. Looks like we have our first poll question. We're asking folks to describe themselves. We want to know who is in the room and who is with us here today. And you should have a poll that's popped up on your screen. So if you could select who you might be, and Katie will close that out in a moment. So give you a second to do that. And hopefully everyone is interested, but you might also be interested and represent one of these groups. So.
And I believe it is a pick only one, so. So I'm going to end the polling. Most everyone's answered. Oh, we got a few more coming in. So there we go. We have a lot of people who are just interested, but we have some active farmers, some agricultural landowners, and some planning board members and staff. So a nice variety of people. Can you see those results right now?
No.
Can you see them now?
Yep.
There you go.
Thank you.
There you go. I'm going to close that. All righty. So let me get to your slides.
All right. Thank you, Katie. Again, I'm Erica Goodman. I am the New York Regional Director for American Farmland Trust. I'm currently based out of Saratoga County, which is where our offices in New York are located. And I'm going to talk today about some, most of this is really based upon some new research that AFT has recently released called Farms Under Threat that looks at spatial data as well as kind of policy analysis to look at how each state across the country is doing when it comes to protecting farmland. So we'll look and talk about New York and also look at some other factors connected to farmland protection and kind of keeping land and farming that are impacting farmland in New York State. And we'll do a quick glimpse at some of the policy, but really others here today, Jeff is going to talk about that a little bit more and really dig in more into spatial analysis. So next slide. The first piece I want to do is just introduce you to AFT. For those of you who aren't familiar, American Farmland Trust is a 40-year-old membership organization that works nationally, but we've had a presence here in New York State for about 30 years. And we're focused on 3 key areas. So protecting farmland. We do this work in partnership with organizations across the state and land trusts across the state, but really ensuring that there continues to be support and policies that enable farmers to protect their land and have that as one of the components of really saving the land that sustains us. The other 2 pieces of that are promoting sound farming practices, ensuring that not only is land protected, but it's also there are practices on the land that are ensuring that it remains healthy and supporting kind of positive climate outcomes for the future. And then also making sure that we have farmers to keep farming, that we are helping farmers to find and gain access to land as well as to succeed in agriculture. So we have programs that focus on those areas too. Next slide. Farms Under Threat is AFT's multi-year initiative. The information I'll share today is from our State of the State report. We've done a national review as well as some upcoming research that we'll be digging into as well. But it is really looking at the threats and the status of America's farmland while thinking about what are the solutions. So I'm going to have some slides that feel a little doom and gloom of where we are, but really with giving us the grounding of what we have and the opportunity ahead of us through some of the policies and programs that New York has. And this is all done in partnership with conservation science partners as well as with support from NRCS. Next slide, please. So the report uses geospatial technology to identify exactly where agricultural land has been paved over and fragmented and otherwise converted. That's coupled with state policy analysis to see what states and lawmakers have done and how they've succeeded in addressing the threats to agricultural lands. If you could advance for just a second there, Katie. And this information is currently being used and continue to being used to raise public awareness, to share as tools for communities and practitioners like many of you on the call today, to be able to think about your own communities and then to inform state and federal policies, as well as to encourage more direct permanent farmland protection. So it's, looking at the conversion, looking at the policy response, and making sure that we're kind of have the tools and thinking about how to continue to do the good work that's happening, but what more needs to lie ahead. Next slide, please. So when looking at what's happening across the country, we'll just do a quick review. So 2001 to 2016 is the scope of time that we looked at for assessing the data, and saw that across the country, 11 million acres of farmland were converted. That's about 2,000 acres a day, or as someone's done the calculation, there's 64 acres for every show you watch on Netflix and, flip to the next episode. So think about that when you're binge watching your next episodes. But the threat is really, what's identified here is not just the threat and where we've seen farmland converted, but also where some of the best farmland is in the country. So as part of the analysis is where is the most productive, versatile, and resilient farmland. So really farmland that's best positioned to help to feed and to grow food as well as have the least environmental impact in order to reach those goals. So what you're looking at here is really where kind of those red marks are identified where the conversion is happening, but this green is where you see some of the best farmland. And New York has that. So if you could move to the next slide. Drilling down to New York, we lost, if you could advance one more, maybe 2 more. And the last one, okay. Sorry about that. So the drilling down in New York, we lost more than 250,000 acres of farmland in that 15-year period. And about half of that is this nationally significant farmland. So the map you see here, that green color shows where that best farmland is and where the conversion of farmland happened. And I think it's important to note that in the Tug Hill region, both Jefferson and Oneida counties are both among the top 20 in the state that saw the most conversion of acres, and also have some of the best farmland in the country when we're looking at counties in New York State. So it's important to kind of couple those together of where you're both seeing that conversion happen, but also what the quality of the farmland is. So if you could go to the next slide, I think, oh, we have another poll. So we're going to talk a little bit about what the threats are, but I'm curious to know if you have some idea of what those threats might be. So we're going to pop up a next poll, and if folks can take a moment to think about what the biggest threat is to farming where you live.
Sorry for the surprises on the polls, Erica. We kind of tried to figure out where they fit best.
Perfect time.
You're doing great.
I wish I'd queued up some Jeopardy music while we were meeting. All right, looks like, half responded transferring farms to next generation, and also high on lack of profits, some to residential subdivisions and solar energy proposals. So that's great, thank you. And that certainly aligns with what we're seeing too. If you want to move to the next slide. I'm gonna kind of spend more time digging into the development pressure piece. And I think which is interesting seeing the polls because some of this research kind of looked at it a bit differently, but also touch on this generational transfer of farmland and solar development, which is something we're kind of seeing as where farmland is vulnerable to being pulled out of agriculture as well. So next slide, we'll talk about the continued development pressure. So about 250,000 acres, just over that, in New York State were converted. About 20% of that acreage was urban and highly developed farmland. And this is the type of conversion we think about and we see in these pictures where, it's clear that there's been massive development, subdivisions, strip malls, big box stores, Amazon centers or whatever they might be. And so that's, I think, what we're most familiar with, but we were able to look at a different type of land conversion in this report, low density residential. If you could go to the next slide, please. And we've known that this type of low density residential has been happening, but this is really the first time we've been able to look at it and map it and kind of zoom into different communities and able to kind of see how that's happening. And this is a type of fragmenting of farmland that often disrupts it and is not as visible. And in New York State, we saw that 78% of the farmland that was, considered threatened or lost was this low density residential. So it's something like really important we're thinking about from the state level, but also we'll look at a little bit at the community or regional level in considering what we mean by that loss or threatened to farmland. And I'll say too, because kind of economic viability was highlighted as one of the key factors, is that this is oftentimes where that might begin is, we know that non-farming neighbors might start moving in, it gets harder to farm, some of the supporting businesses are not around, though in some cases it does provide opportunities for more direct marketing to those community members, but for the most part, it's harder for existing farmers to stay in business and really harder even to have like a new generation come in. And we'll quickly go to the next slide. It's, these are the low density residential type development in New York State. That type of land is shown to be 10 times more likely to actually convert to some sort of urban development. So something we want to kind of keep in mind and think about in looking at the land base too. If you could go to the next slide. So just to, again, kind of reiterate this point about low density residential land use, we did find that it's really best understood looking at a spectrum and ranging from those large lot subdivisions to more rural areas where there are more and more maybe individualized houses that are being built. So you can see, excuse me, you can see the spectrum that's here on the screen, that on the left there are houses that are 2 to 5 acre sublots. Everyone probably recognizes sprawl, and we know that that land is pretty much taken out of commercial farming. In the middle is more of some open farmland that's surrounded by houses, and it's probably more in a holding pattern, or might be the next domino to fall and thinking about farming in that specific community. And on the right is a landscape where most of the land is still open, and if you look closely, there are quite a few houses in there, and it built up. So it, how to be able to look at that and think about that fragmentation and that scattered housing through kind of this mapping lens, because it's really hard to sometimes see visibly. You might see a house or two pop up over time, but it's not kind of the same build out as you might see in a subdivision. Next slide, please. So for the technology's sake, we aren't going to switch screens and really actively zoom into the mapping tool, but I just pulled a quick screenshot for the website, and we'll make sure to include the link to the website at the end of the presentation. But what is shown here on the map, the green is the crop and pasture land across the state. This orange color is where the low density residential development is happening, and the red is more that urban. And so I try my best to capture the counties within the Tug Hill region, but you can really go on there and zoom in and look at a much closer community level and see. And anecdotally, I've been able to look into the road that I grew up on and able to see where there used to be 2 farm families, including my own, have now kind of dispersed and broken up into that low density housing that was in the last slide. So you all probably can spend a little bit more time and know more of those community based issues that are happening to really be able to zoom in and see some of that data. So I encourage you to take that dive in to kind of understand where that development is happening and how that maps out. And I'll say too, it's not shown here, but we do have layers that show where the best farmland is, where that nationally significant farmland is, and a few other factors that you might find helpful, and encourage folks, if you do dive in and have questions, to certainly reach out to me. So the next couple factors that we see are really, if you go to the next slide, is aging farmers in New York State. And this is something we're seeing across the country, but in New York, 1/3 of our farmers are 65 and older, and that means about 1.7 million acres of farmland are held by these farmers. And so if you could advance, please. The balance of that, and kind of seeing where some of these farmers, and a majority of them, might not have someone coming in as already kind of poised to take over. There are new farmers and more diverse farmers looking to access land, but it can be unaffordable. And so programs like farmland protection programs kind of help to bridge that gap, but it's something that definitely is putting farmland at risk. Next slide, please. And specifically, like this map actually breaks down the ratio of farmers 65 or older to those 35 and younger. And this is all Census of Ag data that in the Tug Hill region, if you look on average, it certainly ranges, as you can see from this map, the ratio is 3 to 1. So senior farmers outnumbering younger farmers. And so just, another reason to think about not just what the land base is, but who will be holding and transitioning that land. Next slide, please. And then the last piece that's probably front of mind these days is certainly solar development and solar siting on farmland. This map looks at, the green is that nationally significant farmland that I've spoken about. And though a bit outdated, these are some of the large scale solar siting projects currently proposed out there. And so I think there's certainly a great need for increased renewable energy in New York State. And I think how we're approaching, and how we certainly encourage others too, is to use some of these tools to think about where the best farmland is. And though that is also the wide open flat fields that are probably best for solar panels, to perhaps think about how to avoid the best farmland. And certainly, there are opportunities through continued research to look at dual use and other efforts as well. But this is a topic I'm sure we can have a whole other webinar about, but it's something to consider when we're thinking about farmland loss. Next slide, please. So, a lot of that was kind of based on the mapping spatial data portion of Farms Under Threat. We also did an analysis of policies and programs on a state-by-state basis and compared them. These were the policies that rose to the top of kind of what helped to keep farmland and farming and to keep farmland protected. I'm not going to go into detail. I know Jeff's going to talk about some of these programs, but just wanted to mention that these were what were included. If you could advance the slides, please. AFT was, or AFT, New York was in kind of the second to highest quadrant here when we're looking at how states scored in terms of their policy, and certainly saw those on the two coasts where there is higher population density, there was more kind of spurred action across those states. If you could advance the next one, please. Just do a quick look at how New York stacked up for those different policies. And we ranked #1 in the country for farmland programs, for state-sponsored farmland programs, which, if you go to the next slide, is the Farmland for New Generation program. So it's a partnership with the state of New York and 27 organizations that serve as regional navigators to help farmers looking for land and farmers trying to find a farmer for the land. So that kind of generational piece we touched on, to really be able to do that with some centralized resources and one-on-one support that regional navigators provide. And Tug Hill Tomorrow Land Trust is one of those regional navigators. So certainly would encourage you to connect with them on that front. But over the 2 years plus of the program, almost 70 farmers have found access to land and hopefully still going. So we're excited about that. But I will stop, and I think the last is the closing slide, and pass it off to Jeff. Yep. So here are my contact information and website. I'm not sure if we have time for questions, but also can certainly answer them in the chat too if they're necessary.
I don't think we have any questions in the chat yet, so everybody's getting a little shy still, but I'm sure they'll warm up as we go. So we might as well switch right to Jeff. And again, if you do have any questions, feel free to type them in the chat and we will answer them as we can. Jeff, are you ready?
I'm here. I'm ready. Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Erica. Okay, so the theme here tonight, welcome everybody. Now, I noticed from Erica's poll that there were no municipal supervisors, but there are planning board members, farmers, and landowners. So I'll do my best to tailor this, but there's some few good opportunities here, and maybe I'll demystify some of the confusing language that's floating around the world of agricultural protections. Next slide, please.
So we put a poll here. I'll launch that. So this is an easy question. Does your town address agriculture in its comprehensive plan or zoning law? And the options are yes, no, or you're not sure. All right, so here are the results. Over half say yes, which is, I think, great. We've got quite a few that aren't sure, and only one that definitively says no. So there you go, Jeff. And let me get to your next, and I think we just put the second poll question right here so we could ask it and then get you rolling. So this question is, when was the last time your town modified its land use regulations to accommodate agricultural practices? So the options are within the last 5 years, you're in the process, more than 5 years ago, or you're not sure. And I think this question gets to the fact that agriculture changes over time. So there is sometimes a need to go back and look about how your zoning deals with it as different ag practices become part of the ag landscape. So here are the results. Most are not sure. A couple in process, one within the last 5 years, and then several more than 5 years ago. So there you go. Turn it back over to you, Jeff. And Jeff, we can't hear you if you're talking. Maybe you're muted. It looks like we lost Jeff. Oh, maybe he's coming back. 1 second. Jeff, I think you might have just rejoined us, but you're maybe on a phone, and I'm asking you to unmute. I'm not sure what the code is to unmute. Oops.
Okay, is everybody there?
There you
Can you hear
go.
me?
You're on. Yep.
Wow, my entire system shut down. So thank you very much for being patient. So here's a snippet from a Ag and Farmland Protection Plan from Rockland County, which is a decidedly urban county next to New York City, but you know, that is a reality that has happened to many urban counties. It's not really affecting your region in the same way, but I think Erica talked a lot about the threat that suburban development has and other conversions to farmland. So I bring this up because the Agricultural Districts Program, which I'll get into in a minute, is a tool to help measure and manage farmland. So that is why we happen to know that there are only 10 farms on 17 parcels left today in that county. Next slide, please. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to ask these rhetorical questions just to kind of, everybody should ask these questions of their own town, right? Because the local government is really where they can affect policies that help protect agriculture, help promote agriculture. And the Ag Districts Program, next slide, please, will help farmers, landowners, and municipal officials understand where their concentrations of high quality agricultural land are. So if you look at the dark green, these are agricultural district parcels throughout the state. The 4-county study area, of course, is in that oval. But within that oval, the agricultural district, again, a conservation program established in 1971, I believe, was to help stem the tide of suburbanization into the agricultural areas. There's 750,000 acres in the 4-county study area as of right now. And as of January 1st, the Ag District Program contains over 9 million acres statewide. And that's on nearly 26,000 farms. Next slide, please. So, again, this was targeted for municipal officials, but planning board members and ag enthusiasts, please pay attention to, unfortunately, I wasn't able to see the results of the survey. So, and likely people might not know. There happens to be very few towns in the North Country that have taken advantage or developed a Ag and Farmland Protection Plan locally. We'll talk more about that later. But, you know, some of the threats to agriculture are not only, you know, unbridled suburban development, but there's also things like solar, which again is for another time. There's also opportunities, but it's so misunderstood that this is what I do a lot of the time. A lot of my day is kind of help people better understand, the legal framework, but also, you know, how broad the department interprets agriculture very broadly, and there's a lot of protections and exemptions that come with agriculture, but they're not as simple as they seem. So if you're engaged in agriculture, you know it, right? You know if you're a farm operation, and if you know that things that you do are safe and legal, commonly accepted ag practices. But one of the problems is, let's say, agritourism. It's emerging as an opportunity, but also as problematic to agriculture. So things like agritourism, you've got things just like farm breweries or on-farm entertainment like corn mazes, things like that. What happens is, yes, there is agriculture, but tourism can create a lot of the problems that neighbors and towns misunderstand. So these are some of the opportunities, but also threats in a way. Next slide, please. So again, take a look at these questions quickly and think, for instance, does your local zoning allow agricultural uses in more than an ag zone? In rural areas, typically, if you go back to the 1940s and 50s, when towns began to implement zoning policies, everything, or you know, a good majority of the landscape was in agriculture. And when they developed zoning policies, that was really for development, and agriculture was an afterthought. And over time, like that first illustration showed, if you're not actively paying attention or promoting agriculture, ultimately development pressure will leave you with very little agriculture. It fragments those big blocks of land. It minimizes the profits that farmers can get. It puts non-farmers adjacent to farmers, and lawsuits can begin, complaints, misunderstandings about muddy roads, and a variety of different things. So farm-friendly zoning tries to encourage towns to build into their definitions and codes and regulations opportunities where agriculture can flourish. And at the same time, you don't want to bring in big box retail in the middle of a big ag area, because ultimately that's going to make the surrounding agricultural land more desirable, and its highest and best use will no longer be food, it will become houses. I'll try to illustrate that in a minute. Next slide, please. So this is the northwestern corner of Lewis County, and this, similar to some of the information that Erica had, but this is at a more of a local level. These are different agricultural parcels that have been prioritized based on quality of soils, regulatory protections like being in the ag district or having an ag value assessment. So this is just one way that we can illustrate, or a county can illustrate to their citizens, yes, we do have core areas of agriculture with high quality soil. Here's where they are. Now, how do we plan for that? What land use regulations, what zoning decisions do we make to help these farms continue to be profitable? And if your town also desires to balance agriculture with development, well, here's kind of a roadmap to show you where you may want to limit infrastructure improvements, and you have an opportunity to target your poorer quality soils for development and maintain a critical mass of high quality farmland where the farms are profitable, and on-farm improvements can be made long-term, and as the story goes. So next slide, please. So now I'm trying to talk to the planning board members and the enthusiastic citizens who want to maintain agriculture in their town. And one way to do that is to speak to your supervisor, go back to your town council and suggest to them that they automatically qualify as part of this program for a $25,000 grant to develop a local ag and farmland protection plan. So the way that works, it's about a 6-month application process because there's a lot of collaboration involved. You have to reach out to collaborators like Cornell Cooperative Extension, your county soil and water district, land trust, planning agencies. Sometimes there's local ag schools. And the idea here is you gather people that are enthusiastic about agriculture and want to map it, right? If you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So this grant allows citizen planners, consultants, and other ag institutions in your county and in your town to come together, be part of a robust public participation process over the course of 2 or 3 years. And really what this 2 or 3 year process does, it takes citizens and municipal officials on a journey to better understand the variety, how widely interpreted agriculture is. We include maple sap, right? Wood-grown botanicals, mushrooms, equine operations. There's a wide variety of things that may not just be corn that are considered agriculture. And behind all of that, there's a wide variety of very confusing laws that are there to help protect agriculture, but again, they don't necessarily allow the farmer to do whatever they want. So that's a popular misconception. And going through this process is a great way to educate the public and, more importantly, your policymakers at the local level. So if you're saying, well, that's too many hurdles to jump through, well, $1,700 cash, that's the town buy-in, and then your other project partners like Cornell and the planning agency would have to contribute about $6,700 over time. And then typically you give the $25,000 to a qualified consultant who is very familiar with the frustrations of agriculture. They're very familiar with the definitions, and they can really help the town bump steer their regulations to help accommodate and promote agriculture. Let's go to the next slide, please. So why ag protection planning? Why would we call it such a thing? It doesn't really exist alone. It's really a combination of planning tools that ultimately help protect agriculture. Like I said earlier, historically, poor planning or lack of planning has created an environment where ultimately houses win. And again, traditional zoning, a lot of these zoning codes were developed 60 years ago and really haven't been updated. They haven't been updated to accommodate things like farm breweries, farm cideries, on-farm solar, and agritourism interests. So there's a lot of swirling opportunities, but it's confused often by the lack of definitions at the local level to promote agriculture. So, okay, let's see. So how is this best done at the local level? Again, in New York State, we're a home rule state, which gives towns, local municipalities, the ability to control what happens on the ground, on their land base. So next slide, please. So really, these are simple actions that anybody on the phone or on this webinar can think about and maybe bring up to their own town. Does your town have a right to farm law? Does your town have agricultural zoning that promotes and allows for agriculture? I'm sure some towns do. That stretch of Lewis County, well, I mean, it's filled with agriculture. However, That's not the case all the time. And along certain corridors and certain highways where people don't really understand the importance of agriculture and how that money cycles locally through the economy, they may feel that homes or a higher density development benefits the town more than agriculture does. That's very specific to where you are in the world, but so let's take a look at a couple of these things right here. So if you don't have zoning, you might have a comprehensive plan. Is agriculture front and center in that? Does your comprehensive plan promote agriculture and create a vision for agriculture being part of your town? Right to farm laws, that's a local mechanism that allows the town to put its best foot forward and recognize agriculture. And often, if a town's really paying attention, they can provide a mediation mechanism in that law so that it limits farmer-neighbor disputes. That's really one of the goals that we're trying to do. Lateral restrictions are, it's a voluntary mitigation tool where if public funds are advanced to put a water line in, and if that water line happens to go through high-quality farmland, the power of the lateral restriction would be to limit the amount of people that could hook up on that, limit the amount of non-farm laterals to access that water. So basically, that water line may serve a remote purpose, but along the way, it doesn't open up that stretch of farmland for development. And of course, an ag data statement is it's an acknowledgement when a property changes hands that indeed you are in an agricultural district in a place where agriculture takes priority and those farmers are protected. So not every town uses that in the way that they could. But what I'm going to do is, I think I'm done. I think we're going to allow for questions. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have regarding a variety of ag protections or ag districts. So thank you. I think we're going to go to Linda shortly.
Yep, thanks, Jeff. And I still don't see any questions in the chat, so we'll just keep moving on ahead. We're at 7:43, so we're doing pretty good with the timing. And there you go, Linda.
Thanks, Katie. So we've kind of heard the big picture story about the state of agriculture in New York State and in the country, and some planning tools that we can use to help protect farmland. And I'm going to talk specifically about farmland conservation on Tug Hill and what the Land Trust does and how we protect farmland. So go on to the next. So just a little bit about the Land Trust. We're a regional organization founded in 1990 and incorporated in 91. So we're celebrating 30 years this year. Woo woo. And we serve portions of Jefferson, Lewis, Oswego, and Oneida counties. Next slide. And our mission is to protect the working lands and farms of Tug Hill and the wildlands and the surrounding areas, and to promote the appreciation of the region's natural and cultural heritage for future and present generations. And we do this through land protection and outreach and education. So this is just, if you're not sure, if you're not from the region, where the Tug Hill region is, right between Lake Ontario and the Adirondack Park. And there's a great map that is on the screen that you can get from the Tug Hill Commission of the towns that are included. There's 41 towns, I believe. Might be more, it keeps changing. People are adding to it. So we protect farmland through a variety of ways. We purchase development rights. It's basically an agricultural conservation easement. We accept donated conservation easements, and we work with towns and county agriculture and farmland protection boards to help them with their planning efforts and to identify important farmlands throughout the town. Next slide. So when I'm talking about purchasing development rights programs, there are several different programs, either state or federal programs that are available. There's the Ag and Markets Farmland Protection Implementation Grants, the Ag and Markets Dairy Transition Grants, the Army Compatible Use Buffer Program, which is very specific to in where those protections can happen. And then the federal government has an Ag Conservation Easement Program that we'll talk a little bit about all of these programs. Next slide, Katie. So in New York State, we're working with the on the Farmland Protection Implementation Grants. We work with our counties to select projects. And you can see in the center, these are the different regions that we compete in. So our region, we're competing with all of the counties that are in that central region. So it's a very competitive process, and each application, when the state puts out requests for proposals, we work with the farmer to come up with the best projects. We're trying to look at soils, how big those projects are, how viable the farm is, where it's located. Is it next to other protected land, or is it next to, state land or county land? The application process, the land trust does the lion's share of those applications, and they're very time consuming. And like I said, we're competing with projects from the whole middle part of New York State. So we have a lot of competition when we're putting these applications in. And as you can imagine, the funding is limited. So we try to select the best projects that will be the most competitive. Next slide. A farmer cannot apply himself. He has to partner with a land trust or a town or a soil and water conservation district. Those are the three organizations, agencies that can apply for these grants. The caveat is that whoever applies for it has to hold the conservation easement. That's the end result of the project. And a lot of towns and soil and water conservation districts don't want to be responsible for storing those conservation easements. So they've been working with us to do that. Both the town board and the county farmland protection board have to approve the project before we can submit it. That sometimes you wouldn't think that would be a big hurdle, but sometimes it can be a hurdle. And so we've been really trying to get the word out to towns about the importance of farmland protection and what it means and what a conservation easement means, because there's a lot of misinformation out there. The land trust does complete the application and submit it on behalf of the farmer. And then if that project is selected, then there's a lot more work that needs to happen. It takes probably 2 to 3 years, but the end result is that the farmer gets paid to give up the development rights on his farm. So he gets to continue to farm the land like he always has, but there's no development pressure on there. There's no pressure for him to be selling lots off, to pay taxes or whatever. I know that there's a lot of farmers that get knocks on the door all the time. It keeps the land available for farming, and it's there forever. It doesn't matter what kind of farming happens, but the way that the easements are crafted, they're very flexible to allow for you to change if you're a dairy to maybe being beef or to be a vineyard. There's all kinds of different flexibilities on what type of farming can happen. And that's up to the farmer. The land trust doesn't dictate that. Next slide. So the other program that New York State has is the Dairy Transition Grants, and they're very similar to the Farmland Protection Implementation Grants, except that they are specifically for dairy farms that are looking to transition either to the next generation or a new owner, or to diversify their operation. Again, the town board and the county farmland protection board have to approve those projects. And unlike the competitive nature of the first grants that I was telling you about, these are first come, first serve. So if you have a complete application and you're the first one in line and there's still money in the pot, then your project will be approved. Right now, we're not really sure what the future of those grants are. Next. So another option that we use a lot is the Army Compatible Buffer Program. We partner with Fort Drum and Ducks Unlimited. It's very similar to the state program, but it's specifically for the area around Fort Drum. And it's so that they can continue to train and not have a lot of development right up to the fence line, that which they call encroachment, that would prevent them from being able to train like they need to. The Army does set the priorities for which projects we work on. And we do have some state funding that we've been able to acquire so that we can match it with the federal funding. But it's a very similar program as far as the outcome. And a lot of the land around Fort Drum is ag land that we've been able to protect. Next slide. So you can see Fort Drum, and all of the purple on this map are the farms that we've protected so far. 29 farm families, 8,451 acres. The stuff in the south that Katie's hovering over was kind of in response to some wind towers that were being proposed, and they were trying to give farmers an option to protect their farms without having to put wind towers on their. There was a potential threat to Fort Drum with having all those wind towers, but apparently they've worked that all out, so that's not really even a priority area anymore for Fort Drum. Next slide. So this program with the federal government, again, you have to have a land trust or a soil and water conservation district to apply on your behalf. We have not done any of these programs. You can go to the next slide, Katie. It has a 50% cost share, so the farmer gets paid 50%, and then we have to figure out where we're getting the other 50%. So that's part of the issue. We can match it with state, but we haven't been able to figure out how to make these two programs match yet. So we're still working on that. So we haven't actually done any projects with this federal program specifically, but it's something that we're hoping we can do, because there really aren't a lot of options and money available for farmland protection in the region. Next slide, Katie. So the other option is that a landowner, a farmer, might decide that they want to donate a conservation easement, an agricultural conservation easement to us. Next slide. And the reason why they do that is you kind of think, why would we donate our development rights? Most times these farmers just love the land. They want to have the peace of mind of knowing that this farm that they've worked forever is going to be available for farming and not put into a subdivision or a development. And there are some tax benefits that go along with it, as most donated conservation easements. I'm not going to get into that right now. We're getting close on time. So next slide, Katie. So working with towns and county planning and farmland protection boards, we have been able to have a seat at the table for all 4 of our county agriculture and farmland protection plans. So we have input on that. And work with them. It helps us, informs us when we're trying to select the best projects to submit for these funding, to have good plans that actually identify particular farms that are important to protect for those towns. Town comprehensive planning, we've been asked several times to work with towns to kind of review what they're looking at, and to also, in some planning, in some plans, we've been actually written right into the plan that, you know, they want to work with us to protect farmland in towns. Providing information about the importance of farmland conservation to our towns and our communities. I know that I hear a lot that, you know, there's so much farming, you know, in the Tug Hill region, you know, why do we need to protect it? Because there's so much of it. And I think tonight you've heard a little bit about the fact that it kind of sneaks up, especially the scattered residential development that's happening, and you don't realize it until it's too late. And also being very intentional about trying to protect the really important farmland so that you have the best that you're protecting that's going to grow food for us into the future. And trying to keep a critical mass of farmland that's protected, that will be able to allow farming that can also support all of the other businesses that support farming. That's part of our agricultural economy in this region. A lot of people say they want to live in the region because they love the rural pasture-like landscape, but if we don't pay attention, that's going to be gone. And we are currently working on a region-wide agricultural protection plan, which actually would extend outside of the Tug Hill region into the entire 4-county area that we're working with. And we're hoping to have that done later on this summer. So I think that's it for me. And then we have a couple minutes to answer questions if anybody has any questions. We do have our next webinar that's coming up in a month, next month on March 10th. That'll be about forest conservation. We're still working on all of the details on that, but it'll be similar to tonight's, looking at working with some federal forest conservation programs, talking about that with someone from the Forest Service and then somebody from DEC as well as myself. So hopefully you can join us for that. Any questions, Katie?
We have no questions. I guess you guys are just so good that there is nothing left to ask. Or maybe people are just tired. I don't know.
Both.
They've been shoveling snow.
Mm.
So thanks for everyone for coming. I think we do have 2 books to give away, so don't leave quite yet. I will announce the 2 winners. The first is Rosanna Sutherland. Rosanna, I know you were on here a little while ago, so, and I think you still are. So Rosanna, you will receive a Tug Hill Natural History Field Guide in the mail. And our second winner is Julie Panna. And Julie, I think you were here as well, and you are still here. So there you go. We will be contacting you for your mailing address, and we will send a link out to everyone. We'll send these materials out to everyone. Oh, and Rosanna wants to, she's got her hand raised, so I'm going to allow you to talk, Rosanna. You could speak if you'd like. And you're muted. Can you unmute yourself, Rosanna? Well, if not, we will be in touch with you. And thank you, Erica and Jeff and Linda, for a great presentation tonight. This will be on our YouTube channel as well. And I hope everyone has a great evening.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Safe travels.
Yeah. One good thing about Zoom webinars. Good night, guys. Thanks again.
Take care. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.